That's a good sound, and it looks like folks are starting to make their way in here. So I'm just gonna wait a moment or two more while I watch for our streaming to tell me it's live. Maybe it is. Okay, I think we're live. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our live virtual event with Keenan Norris for the Confessions of Copeland Cane, and Tina Ontiveros will be chatting with him about that. I'm Jessica, from the Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Apsalaki Crow, Cheyenne, Shoshone Bannock, and Ochady-Choukowan people, and the Shoshone Bannock. Or the Salish Kootenai, I already said Shoshone Bannock. We encourage those of you joining us from outside Montana and to look at the stories of the peoples of the lands that you occupy. We are grateful to share this virtual space with our fellow Books in Common stores, Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and Madison Books in Seattle, Washington. You can visit www.booksincommonnw.com for more information on our upcoming events, or just follow us on Eventbrite and register for all of them. Before we get to our speakers this evening, I do want to point out a few things about our virtual space. We'll be dropping a link into the chat here momentarily where you can purchase a copy of Confessions of Copeland Cane if you didn't already with your registration. Just click on the logo of your favorite sponsoring store and you can fill up your cart because you're going to want to gift it to everyone. We are recording tonight's event, and it will be viewable later at the Books in Common NW YouTube channel after the event concludes. So if you have to duck out early, you can catch what you missed uninterrupted there on YouTube. If you have questions for our panelists, you can submit them by clicking the Q&A button either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on what kind of device you're watching on. You can also drop them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end as time allows. If you run into any tech issues along the way, we do recommend that you just exit and re-enter the webinar. If that doesn't work, look for that live stream on YouTube. And if you are having trouble with sound, headphones will usually fix the problem. I do want to remind everyone, of course, that this is a shared creative space that we want to remain safe for everyone that's joined us, and we ask that folks be respectful. Offensive or inappropriate comments or questions will see the user dismissed from the space. So, with all that business out of the way, I'm delighted to introduce our speakers tonight. We are joined by Keenan Norris, who holds an MFA from Mills College and a PhD from the University of California, Riverside. A 2017 Marin Headlands Artist in Residence and a Yerba Buena Center for the Arts Fellow. He teaches American Literature and Creative Writing at San Jose State University and serves as a guest editor for the Oxford African American Studies Center. Keenan is the editor of the groundbreaking Street Lit, representing the urban landscape, and his short work, both fiction and nonfiction, has appeared in numerous forms, including the Los Angeles Review of Books, Oakland Noir, Literature for Life, PopMatters.com, Post Soul, Satire, Inlandia, Literary Journey Through the Californias, Inland Empire, Abernathy, a magazine for Black men, and Boom, a journal of California. And of course, Tina Ontiveros is no stranger to the Books in Common stage. She is a writing instructor at Columbia Gorge Community College in the Dalles and a former president of the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association. Keenan, Tina, take it away.
All right. One, if I may.
You may. It's your night.
All right. So thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody who's on this call. Books in Common, first of all, and Tina, of course, and everybody else, all the attendees as well. Thank you guys for being here. So.
Is that my cue?
Yeah, that is your cue.
Thank you, Jessica, for all your work, not just in introducing us, but one of the silver linings of COVID is that we get to go to a lot of author events online now that we probably wouldn't fit in our schedules otherwise. And I go, and of course I published a book in the fall, and I had a lot of events, and I've been to a lot of events, and I just say, I have to tell you, you always do such an excellent job at Books in Common. They're very lucky to have you. And also I want to thank the 3 bookstores that put this event series on. Those are the Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, and Madison Books in Seattle, Washington, and Paulina Springs in Sisters, Oregon. So I hope if you are considering purchasing a book, I hope everyone here purchases 3 books, one from each bookstore, because I can't tell you guys, I've spent years selling books, how much hard work it is for little pay, and how precious our independent bookstores are to the work that Keenan and I would like to keep doing.
Yeah.
So, okay. And finally, thank you, Keenan. It's such a privilege to be here with you tonight. And I'm noticing we have quite a few Goddard folks in our audience. So many of you might know that it's just, Keenan was my my advisor and teacher. And so it's just a huge privilege to be able to do this with somebody who helped me so much with my first book. So thank you. Anything else, Keenan, before we jump in?
No, well, actually, I'd like to read from the start of the book. And so I think this is as good a time as any to do that. So,
Excellent.
All right. So I'm actually not going to read from the very start of the book, but from the beginning of the eponymously named Copeland Cane, or Cope, as he goes by throughout the book, from the beginning of his part of the book. They already arrested Keisha Free and DeMichael, snatching them up easy because so clear done search out their location. Then law enforcement did that criminal contact tracing thing. Followed them from their phones and whatnot, bagged them up. Long as we're talking technology, boss, you might as well know my audio comes to you unencrypted in this bootleg old presaged voice app, the most off-brand, unheard of cell phone app you will ever encounter. It calls itself the Cayman Island of apps. Don't ask how I got this mess on my phone, but it's all yours truly got to work with. So you might have to trust me on this one, even if you're not trying to trust this technology. Real talk, Jack. I only ask that the people hear me all the way out. It won't jeopardize y'all no kind of way, except maybe in y'all feelings. I can't tell you about your heart, but I'm gonna try and tell you what's in mine. Nobody want to hear why shit hit such a swerve and went so left, but the fact is, it was all kind of facts done built up to the one big fact. Excuse me, edit that. The one pivotal incident that everybody and their mama cares so much about. The crime in question, the weed that worked its way up from spoiled soil to choke the chief gardener. Now I'm giving testimony the only way I know how, without having Mr. Miranda's rights read to me. I'm making a real record right now, not just how that man got, but about everything that got me here. Copeland Cane, the alleged accomplice, the fugitive, the ghost, the rabbit, the radiated, the remediated, medicated, incarcerated, the child who fell out of colored people time and into America. The whole deal, to go against the apex predator that they steady creating me into on the news feed every 5 minutes. And fair warning, I tend to tell 3 stories to tell one and get sidetracked sometimes, but I'm gonna try and not do that shit. So, beginning.
Spoiler alert, he does do that shit. It's one of my favorite things about the book. So, okay. What I thought I would do, Keenan, is just first start by, this book has enjoyed some actually really wonderful reviews, so congratulations on that. And I thought maybe I would sort of summarize / paraphrase / skip through the Publishers Weekly review, because I think it gives a nice overview, and there are a lot of folks in our audience who haven't read the book yet. So I'm just going to kind of pick some sentences for you guys, and this is from Publishers Weekly. Norris delivers a powerful treatise on the double consciousness of a young Black man in this dystopian look. I do want to revisit the whole idea of dystopian later. this dystopian look at police oppression and surveillance in the 2030s. Coming of age in East Oakland amid racial terror in the form of televised police brutality and the quote ghetto flu, 18-year-old Cope Cane becomes a fugitive after his role in a protest that turned violent. Beloved by his swap meet queen mother and unemployed father, I also want to revisit that reductive description of his parents. But we're summarizing, so Cope, who previously landed a private school scholarship, now chronicles his transformation into a societal threat. Cope's persuasive and irresistible confession emerges in non-sequential strands, circling around the crime he's suspected of having committed while outlining the economic, legal, and social disparities faced by a dark-complected person in a politically divided country ravaged by a global pandemic. So Keenan's keeping it light for us.
Yeah, light summer reading.
And there's a final line that's my favorite line of this review, which is, in Cope, Norris has created a voice that cannot be ignored. And I think that's so true. And I think everybody just heard that in what you read. And I very much hope it's true in terms of the book's reception and how many people hear Cope's voice and purchase this book. So I just wanted to start by talking about that voice, because to me, Cope's voice definitely feels like the foundation of the book. And as a writer, I feel like it does so much work in terms of character building. So I read it feeling very, very aware of the level of craft that went into creating that voice. So, and as you know, because we worked together on my book, I grew up below the poverty line, and something that I found in common with Cope is the way the voice is not consistent, but that's what makes it right.
Right.
Because I would change my speech based on where I was and understood different things were expected of me. So I just found this perfect and compelling. So will you talk to us a little bit just about the conscious decisions you made or anything about the voice of the book?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So yeah, I really like Cope's voice too. I do hope other people, vibe with it. Voice, I think, we kind of, we have these standards around, especially in creative writing classes and MFA programs and so forth, that voice must be consistent. And, that always rang false to me, just from my lived experience and hearing people's voices, listening to people speak, especially people who, navigated, as Tina, as you just said, across class boundaries, whether it be a kid from a lower income family going to school in a private school on scholarship, whatever the kind of cross-cultural hopscotch that, is being performed, that people's language and their, the voice is not consistent, that oftentimes, also, let me also add in there, aside from class, you have culture, race, etc., all kinds of things that do have some bearing on the different ways that we express ourselves, diction, slang, etc., references, and those can all get mixed up and mixed in, and especially in a society as diverse as ours, especially in a society as diverse as Copeland Cane's, Oakland, California, they can get, very interwoven. And so I intend his voice to be this kind of mosaic of, his different experiences and the different things that he is, that he's confronted with. At his base, yet Cope speaks in, what academically would be called Black vernacular English, but he also, his voice kind of registers, at least for me, at multiple, along kind of multiple tracks. Cope has a wide vocabulary, as a lot of folks in, Black communities do. He has a wide vocabulary. Some of his references are, the references that come from his time in private school, in a private school in a very liberal, politically liberal area of the country. Some of his references come from, his dad's immersion in Pan-Africanism and so forth, or Pan-African rhetoric, and so there's a lot of different, strands that I wanted the voice to be kind of woven of. One last point on this, while that had always been kind of obvious to me in terms of just my lived experience, the Black linguist, John McWhorter, who is more well known for his political opinions and, whatever people, I know a lot of people on the left don't like McWhorter politically, but, whatever people think about him, in those terms, it is, he is really, really elucidated and like clarified a lot of things for me around ebonics. He studied under one of the creators, one of the scholars who created ebonics as a kind of a language, as a theory of language. And McWhorter has, just in his talks, especially the talk he gave at Google, which you can find on YouTube, really clarified, kind of systematized for me a lot of what I had long experienced and intuited. So
interesting. I already find myself doing what I do whenever I am anywhere with you, which is taking notes. Actually, I listened in on your launch event on the 15th, and I have like a whole page of notes from that. So giving me things to look up later. So following up on that, like I don't know, you just said a few things that struck a chord with me. And one of those was just the way that everyday dialect, I don't know how I extracted this from what you were saying, but there are ways that everyday dialect can be like poetry, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember that being a lesson that you brought to me as a teacher. And I specifically remember you assigning Mitchell S. Jackson, and because you were kind of like, hey, I see you kind of naturally going to your to a more natural voice, and then there's a way that it gets ironed out of us by education, and so you're trying to, and you just talked about inconsistencies and how that wasn't your experience. That's just like a life-changing message, because I always felt like a total poser for changing the way I talk. Like everyone's going to see that I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm just wondering about literary influences, like other books that kind of influence the language or any part of this story.
Yeah, I mean, Mitchell's work, Mitchell S. Jackson's work, specifically his novel, The Residue Years, and his memoir, Survival Math, Notes on an All-American Family, both were very influential, especially The Residue Years, because that came out, several years ago, in just kind of, again, like letting me tap back into the diversity of kind of, language forms that I'm heir to, right? That I can call on in my own writing, because he was doing that. Yeah. And there were just like little things that he was doing that, while of course I'm not like mimicking them, did again inspire me. So like when, he, has the narrator in The Residue Years, right? Peoples, as like this form of address, you really feel as the reader that he's addressing you, right? As the reader. And it's like, wow, that's something he's just taking from sort of a little bit of Black slang and a little bit of hip hop slang, and almost felt like Friends, Romans, Countrymen, I was like, that's dope.
Epic in its way, like in its community. And I think it's just so important. Like you're saying, it gave you permission, but also for me, gives me a sense of validity, right? Like that whatever I'm always telling my students, however your grandmother talked and your mom talked, how can we work that into your work? How can we keep that? Even my comp students, like, hey, I have to teach you how to write an essay, but I want to tell you right now something nobody told me till grad school, and that was Dr. Keenan Norris, which is that voice is so important and you don't want to lose it.
Oh yeah. I mean, little phrases, quiet as it's kept, come to find out, my mother doesn't say Saturday, she says Sarah Day,
totally.
Which is like, at least it's, the only people I've heard say that other than her are like people from the South. And it's
my dad always said crick instead of creek, or wasn't. He always said wasn't instead of wasn't.
And so And so there is this like poetry, this kind of common poetry in, all the different ways that people have spoken. And yeah, a lot of that gets ironed out by these ideas around standard English. And standard English itself is an arbitrary standard. It's not that it's good or bad, it's neither. It's just the arbitrary standard that, the school system, the business world, the legal world, et cetera, maybe not the legal world, I don't know what the hell they're doing, but sorry, John, I see a great lawyer on this call, but but in general, that most of mainstream America has that's the standard that goes with.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily the standard from community to community. It's not necessarily the standard within families. And there's like no reason that one is necessarily better than the other. There are a lot of ways to express oneself. I remember forgetting what Wu-Tang song it is, but Raekwon says, he's describing like a necklace, I think, and he says it's diamonded up. I was like, that is so good. He just took diamond, made it into a verb,
right?
And it expresses what it is.
And we get it, right?
Yeah.
So you guys, somebody Google that and put it in the chat for us, which song that was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we move on from voice, I just want to. I always tell my students, I know I'm going to read a book again. If there are sentences in there that I could cut out and hang on my fridge, and they would hold like universal meaning outside of that book. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, there are just so many in this book, like it's packed with them. So I've got a few. I just kind of arbitrarily went through and picked some of my many underlined sentences. So, and most of them are in Cope's voice. Like, who would want my story anyway? If to tell it, they would have to live it. Like that is like, that rings true with me. People will surprise you if you let yourself care about them. The only way to change your history is to lie about it. Like, I mean, that's just so quotable, Keenan, right? It's so true and simple. Ain't no fair fights in America.
Yeah.
So true. So, I mean, I can't say it enough. Bravo on this voice. It's everything in this book, and you nailed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on from voice because we have little time and I have a lot of questions. By the way, first though, I want to say you mentioned Mitch Jackson, which I'm sure you noticed he just got a Pulitzer for that.
Yes, I did.
Oh, yay. And then I also noticed Lydia greeting us in the chat, and I wanted to mention, not sure if you heard, but Miss Lydia Valentine is now the Poet Laureate of Tacoma, Washington.
Yo.
So, shout out to Lydia.
Many congratulations. And one, thank you for being on the call. And secondly, many congratulations.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your process, if you don't mind. Because I feel like I remember you talking about Copeland Cane as a character quite a while back. Like before COVID was anything we would ever imagine, before George Floyd was murdered. Yet those are both really big, almost foundational themes in the book. So, and there's just so naturally integrated into the world building. So will you talk to us about like your process, but also how you evolved, how the story was evolving in real time with the world? Yeah.
So I originally began to work on this book in 2015 in the wake of the police murders of Walter Scott, Eric Garner, and many others, Laquan McDonald, and many others. And so that was the direct inspiration for the book. I wrote the first 40 or 50 pages, really just a kind of a rush of inspiration, kind of delving the history of this young man, Copeland Cane, not from the, not necessarily just, excuse me, not necessarily just with, the facts surrounding, the crime in question that he talks about, but his whole story going back 10 years prior to, to that incident, and really just unearthing, out of my imagination, out of my memory, a bunch of Oakland scenes. I've always been in love with the first 50 pages of Saul Bellows' The Adventures of Augie March, which take place in Chicago. And my dad grew up in Chicago, and I was kind of channeling that a little bit. And if you guys haven't, First 50 pages of that book are like gold. So, it's a really long book, but beautiful beginning. And so I really wanted to write that. Then at that point, I went to the Callaloo Writers Workshop, which is an international Black diaspora writers workshop with folks from the Caribbean, from the continent, from New York, from LA, from Chicago, and places in between. Really wonderful writers workshop. And, they kind of gave me the go ahead. My teacher there, Robbie Howard, and my classmates, who included Nafisa Thompson Spires, who wrote Heads of the Colored People, Tony Ann Johnson, who's, wrote the Ruby Bridges show, miniseries, and several other folks. And so that was my initial steam with the book. Then, like, years passed, I went and taught at Goddard, like time happened, right? As it always does.
I had to read a lot of really bad manuscripts by those of us who were at Goddard.
I will not co-sign that. And so and then 2020 came around, right? And I was deep into the book. I was pretty much done with the book. And then 2020 just couldn't be ignored. You're talking about things that can't be ignored. 2020 obviously could not. And it spoke so much to the book I was already, writing and almost finished, and brought so brutally to the fore so many of its core themes. And the fact that the book is set in the near future meant that, it was inescapable. It simply, couldn't, there was no way around it. Believe me, I tried to think of every way possible that I could ignore the damn year, but it was too much a part of our daily lives. It, restructured the way we walk down the street, move through the world. So I had to incorporate it. I went back into the guts of the book, and just word by word, page by page, I reimagined Cope's world with, like present data as part of it.
That is a ton of work.
Yeah.
So was it always set in the near future? Was it always set in 2030? Okay.
Yeah. Just real quickly, another thing, the book is kind of based on a thought experiment, which is what if the gentrification that is so much a part of downtown Oakland and North Oakland spread into East and into deep East Oakland? For people who are familiar with the geography of East Oakland, it kind of starts around the Fruitvale or so, somewhere around there. Opinions differ as to exactly where East Oakland starts, and goes through these different neighborhoods all the way into deep East, and Cope lives in deep East Oakland. And so the idea is, if gentrification were to, move that deeply into one of the most, frankly, downtrodden parts of the city, what would be what would be the manifold reactions to that, or, what would happen?
So that was kind of already, and so I see what you're saying, because that was already, that kind of near future timeline was, you're right, there's just no way you're going to get out of COVID.
Right.
Or, like you said, all of 2020, because there's a lot in this book that is very, very current.
Yeah.
And it's comforting in some ways and terrifying in other ways, because it does feel like going back to the Publishers Weekly, referring to it as dystopia. I mean, it feels very much like, it feels very real, and it feels very much like the dystopia that we're living in right now. Like, I hope you're wrong about some of this stuff.
Yeah, I hope so too. I would love for the book, to become totally irrelevant in a few years. I know
it'll never be irrelevant. Because it's so just perfectly, it's history, right? I mean, that's what literature does. Like, we have stories so that we can remember. So, right. Okay. So since you were kind of talking about Oakland, what if we talk about setting for a few minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot there, like your whole body of work. Oakland is really present in your whole body of work. I want to start with the setting of this book, and in particular, The Rock, which is the apartment complex where Cope and his family live. And I know I talked to you a little bit about this as we were preparing for the event. But I felt like, but you didn't answer me, so now you're going to answer me now. I really felt like the influence of Toni Morrison there, because I always tell my students, nobody's going to teach you to write setting like Toni Morrison. And in Sula, you know, the community of the bottom is like a character. It's like alive on the page. And it was a huge influence to me in my memoir, because I feel like, you know, memoir people ignore setting too much. And this was in large part because you told me, hey, revisit Sula. You're going to see a lot about setting in there. I remember that. And how we can make setting into a character. And I just kind of felt like the Rock was like a character. So can you just talk a little bit about it, just so readers know what I'm talking about, but also if you've got influences or.
Sure. Yeah. So the Rock is the Rockwood apartment complex where Copeland's family live. It is sort of in a quadrangle that, and it's one of 4 apartment buildings that make up the Rock. And so, you know, yeah, it becomes this character within the book because it is the site that is sort of under, you know, increasingly under, you know, that's being contended over by these gentrifying forces. Eventually, the, you know, they face environmental injustice within, you know, that becomes a critical theme within the book. And they face, in the face of the environmental injustice, they are, you know, they have to deal with the owner of the building, his neglect, and, you know, they realize over time that it's, you know, it's a planned neglect, right? And so Copeland's very much at pains to kind of define early on in the book, really in the section right after the one that I read, the nature of the Rock, right? He says, you know, we lived in a, you know, Rockwood was not the hood, he says, right? And so he's very much conscious of the ways that people outside of East Oakland view East Oakland and thus view, you know, where he lives, Rockwood. Now, Copeland is also like not free of prejudice himself. And I wanted to also define that, right? So right across the boulevard from Rockwood is Ravenscourt. People who know East Oakland know what these places are based on. But is Ravenscourt, and Copeland has a lot of the same kind of like, you know, unexamined prejudices essentially about Ravenscourt that, you know, folks have about Rockwood. But he finds that Rockwood is in this strange kind of liminal space, you know, between being, you know, prosperous enough to make, you know, Mr. McDonald his money back. And on the other hand, right, not being, you know, in crisis, not, you know, it's not like a place with like heavy gang and drug activity or anything like that, where it would demand immediate attention from the city. And so it kind of becomes this prime site to, you know, for gentrification and just neglect. So.
Yeah. And that just felt so true. The work you did there. And like when he ventures into Ravenscourt, and it's almost like an epic journey, it feels like to me. And it reminded me of being a kid. And it was oddly another place of intersection for me, having grown up rural white poverty, but like, you know, like the trailer park next door, we called it Felony Flats. And those people were way worse off than us. Right. And then there was a certain apartment building there were 2, but one was, you knew people in this one were at this level and people in this one were like, there were these weird prejudices just between the crappy housing we were all living in. And yeah, you never considered yours to be the one that was worse or best, you know? And so it was just really well done. And it just felt so, like, that's what's so beautiful, not about just the voice, but the construction of the book is everything is so specific, but so universal, which is really hard to do, Keenan.
Well, thank you.
So bravo. Okay. So did you want to, I don't want to run out of time for some of my favorite questions. I'd like to talk more about gentrification, but I think first, can we move into, I want to talk about Cope's dad.
Yeah, let's talk about Cope's
dad. Such a great character. And again, reminded me of my dad. And like there's a, let me see, where is it? There's a quote from the very beginning when Cope says, back in the day, Daddy had me surrounded. He was everything to me, even if by the accounting of the government, he barely existed. having no employment, no property, no credit, just a social security number and a name. Like that sentence describes my dad, you know, who didn't work and lived off the grid in these shacks he would build. And, you know, but there was just so much more to that relationship, right? And it was foundational, and it's so foundational for Cope. And I don't know, I just found it like so moving. So I want to hear more about, because Cope's dad, just for the listeners, is an inventor, right? So he does not have, he's unemployed, but he's constantly busy. He's right. And a lot of his inventions are, he's trying to make life better for his community. He's always trying to find ways to make life better for his community. So will you just talk a little bit about him and his work, and then his occupation as inventor? And then, of course, leading into that, you did talk about the environmental injustices earlier, but scientific experimentation and, you know, the role in medicating Black people, all of that related.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question. So yeah, Cope's dad is, you know, he's not formally employed, but, you know, he's got like 17 different hustles. And, you know, by that term, I don't mean anything illegal, right? He's just like the guy who kind of knows how to do everything. And there's a reason, right, that he has built up, you know, such an array of like odd job skills, basically. There's a reason behind that gets revealed. But, you know, that is how Cope knows his father. You know, his dad is, I think in a lot of ways, he's like a mixture of good and bad things, right? He holds a lot of opinions that are, you know, not progressive at all, and probably like get him kicked out of a lot of places. But he also, you know, genuinely loves his son, right? This is also, they call him the old man throughout the book, right? Not only Cope, right? But, you know, Cope's mom too, right? You know, they call him the old man because this is his second family, right? He's, you know, he has a family before this that he, you know, that he raised in Los Angeles. And, you know, and he's really come back to Oakland to, you know, get to, you know, try to make good where before he couldn't, you know, where before he was too immature and, you know, just wasn't ready to be a father and so forth. And so in many ways, you know, he kind of over protects Cope, and some of the, you know, mess that Cope finds himself in later is, you know, really his attempt to like fashion an identity for himself when, you know, where his, you know, dad, yes, had him surrounded, you know, where he was sort of, you know, so kind of dictatorial, for lack of a better word, you know, and incorporates Cope right within his entrepreneurial schemes and so forth. And so yeah, I mean, so I really like that aspect of the father. Cope also says early, you know, in that, you know, introductory passage, he says, you know, it was only natural, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact words, but it was only natural, you know, for a Black man to be an inventor, what with all the experiments we done had ran on us. Yeah. Right? And so there's this way that, yeah, you know, it speaks to this identity as inventor, and, you know, the specific kinds of inventions he attempts to engineer really do speak to the legacy of not just, you know, of environmental injustice writ large, but you know, that in the ways that the you know, medical system has you know, has targeted, experimented upon Black people in America, and has obviously ill-served, you know, Black people in America. You know, we can, you know, just look at something as, you know, impersonal as a virus, right? As a deadly, you know, contagion, you know, that has no prejudice, has no bigotry, right? Has no consciousness, and it's, you know, extremely differential impact upon people of color in general, and especially Black people as opposed to white people, to see that, you know, our flesh is, you know, is differently aired to the same natural shocks, right? And so I think that Cope is, or Cope's father, I should say, they're both named Copeland, but the Cope's father is, I intended him to be a character who, who in his kind of very being speaks to kind of a resistance to, to this, this overwhelming reality that, oftentimes escapes narrative because it's too difficult to dramatize. Like, how do you dramatize a virus? How do you dramatize the effects of lead poisoning or mold poisoning, that are stealth.
Radiation on the island.
Radiation, hell yeah. How do you dramatize that? And so, I sought to get at some of these kind of slower moving evils through the figure of the father. So
yeah. And I love, like you said, he has some problematic points of view that, I mean, that you or I might consider sort of backward, but that makes him feel like such a true character. And because there's so many things that he's survived and is trying to survive. And a lot of what he's doing is that sense of like a different future for his kid and for his children. And then, I think a lot of that, he's so, I guess, strict, for lack of a better word, or surrounds Cope, and they sort of butt heads when Cope wants to go to Piedmonte. and like, he's not trying to stifle him. He just thinks he's got it figured out, and he's trying to help. He's trying to make it easier on Cope. So do you want to talk a little bit about the private school and that? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. You're the first person who's asked me about that in one of these.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's one of my favorite things. The clash of everything he experiences there is like, oh God.
Yeah. So Piedmontane, which Cope, renames or just repronounces Piedmonte.
Okay.
Piedmontane is based on Piedmont, California, which and part of the reason I give Cope this kind of silly repronunciation of the name is I find Piedmont, California, and just going to speak very flatly about this, to be a ridiculous concept in and of itself. I mean, it is, as far as I know, the only city in America that is completely surrounded by another city. Piedmont is extremely wealthy. Oakland, is, you might have heard, is not. It's a way of shielding tax dollars, and a lot of other, public goods from the people of Oakland. Mm-hmm. So, I wasn't trying to be anybody's friend with that. Is what it is.
Well, I found myself immediately, like, I say it the way he says it because it's spelled that way the whole, like, it's spelled in his, but like you can hear him saying it. Right. You can hear him saying it. And it does remind me of the ways my siblings and I would sort of pronounce things differently than they were meant to, and often on purpose, but like, do you want to talk a little bit about, so he goes to a private school there.
Right.
And do you want to talk a little bit about that, his experience, and, because there's a teacher there who immediately sets him up to start writing articles because she wants him to be like the conscience of the campus or whatever. So will you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. So in, the fictional Piedmontane, all the kind of characteristics of the real Piedmont have been exacerbated. It is hyper privatized. It has its own private police force. There are a lot of, indices at which it, it's kicked up. It's in intensity. It's like level of elitism, and Cope ends up getting kind of seduced into going to the private school there. He has a teacher there, his journalism teacher, who gets him to start to write about, to be this kind of, Black kid writing about Black issues, and particularly about police brutality. And it is a role that Cope is sort of, he vacillates, pretty deeply about. He, among other things, he is really unsure about the kind of efficacy of writing itself in terms of its social good.
Mhm.
And, to what extent writing is, simply an exposure of, all that is, all that is wrong and all that is, vulnerable within us, and as well, all that's wrong with the world and all that's vulnerable within us, as opposed to, the kind of social goods that his teacher, is urging him, is like purports that, writing can remedy. And so, so I think that, it was an interesting way for me to kind of explore those things and to, kind of think through them myself, and also make the reader, think through, what kind of book this is, and whether and also kind of question for themselves, why they're reading this book. And, whether you can just kind of, is there like a one-to-one, literature's sort of this salvific thing, or is it more complicated than that? And so I wanted Cope's vacillation around the use of literature to be something that kind of had a meta life to it.
Right. And it certainly does that. And, when he writes about, there's a point at which he's writing about, because it feels like he's being used to just sort of venture out into a space where she doesn't have the courage to venture, right, or whatever, and come back and report back on it. Mm-hmm. And even his journey into Ravenscourt is at the school's urging. They have no idea what they're asking of him when they tell him to do that. Yeah. But when he writes about, I can't remember the nickname that is it Mr. America? Is that what he called? That's what he called. Oh God, was it? I know I've got it written down. When he goes to interview him to write about him because he was assaulted by the police, terribly, like beaten terribly. And he says, putting my brother in print like that felt like a violation. And it's like, I immediately thought, like, this is like what you just said. This made me think, like, what am I doing when I write about something? In particular, my book tour, I was constantly being asked to speak on, for poor people. And it's like, it feels like such a big responsibility, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. Like, what do we owe to our subjects, and how do we do that ethically? And I don't know, it was just really refreshing to see Cope working that out.
Yeah.
At the same time I was working it out.
Right.
Do we need to stop, Jessica?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I'm like, this is fascinating. I did want to make sure that we got to one of our participants' questions, and I just had it and then it flew away. They ask, what are you most proud of with this novel?
That's a great question. So I'm most proud of the first 50 pages of the book. I really do. The series, just that inspiration to bring the story forward, to bring Cope into the world. I really am in love with that early part of his life. All the way up until the fire, where things become tangled for him. And so that I think also just like the exploration of the father-son relationship, those would be the two things I think I'm most proud of. Yeah.
Well, for those of you watching, if Tina's enthusiasm has not been enough to convince you, I hope you will grab a copy. There's a link in the chat. It's booksincommonnw.com. Just click on the logo of your favorite sponsoring store. If there are more questions, please feel free to drop those into the Q&A. Just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can drop them in the chat. I'm watching both spots, but I know Tina is so excited. So if you have another question, Tina, I say go for it.
I might have 1 or 500. I really hope someday we just get to sit down together and talk about this book. There's just so much. If we've got a little time, I've got a lot, but I think the one that I would really want to make sure we touch on is there sort of, and again, I can't remember the exact quote, but there's some talk of like Cope's birthright, right? And like I just wanted you to talk about that. Or I think maybe I got this from your other event that I listened in on. Like, what is Cope's birthright? Like what, because will you talk a little bit about the California gang database and like what he symbolized at birth, regardless of anything he does, regardless of his situation or his story?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so for folks who are gonna explore the book later, we've used footnotes essentially. There's different kind of symbols, but footnotes essentially to track the media's and law enforcement's narrative of Cope as he's telling his story. There's a story, there's an understory to his story that is also going along, and it's of course just that's kind of like rearranging, in sort of the mainstream world, that would be the main story, and his story would be the understory, right? So it's flipping those roles. In terms of his birthright, in terms of the California gang database, he is entered into that database upon birth. And that is not fiction, right? Unfortunately, in Los Angeles County, they found that, that there were kids, I think almost exclusively Black and Latino kids who are being placed at very young ages into the gang data, like way before, anybody become part of a gang, just based on zip code, right? This algorithm that was, that was classifying these kids in this way. And so I wanted to speak to that. Of course, Cope is removed from the database, we're told, by an algorithm error until he's re-entered into it, right? And so I'm playing somewhat with the idea of these algorithms, again, is like, I think we think of algorithms, especially in California, especially in the Bay Area, dominated by big tech and so forth. We think of algorithms as these impersonal, objective functions, right? But an algorithm is only as objective as the people who create it, right? It's only as objective as the input that creates it in the first place. And so a lot of algorithms, as one could just tell from like using Google or whatever, aren't very objective at all. And so you don't want to know 20 years ago as a Black person what, typing in Black people into Google, what that presented to you wasn't pretty at all. And so so I wanted to kind of dramatize the algorithm in a way, and give it, a narrative and a life. And Cope's, reality, his identity, as it's reshaped, by this algorithm, how it's reshaped by, by these institutions that have their own narrative for him. So.
Yeah, and we didn't even get a chance to talk about the footnotes, but that's such a big part of the structure, or structure at all. I'll put that on for our next talk. But yeah, that's such a big part of how we learn Cope's story, is through these footnotes that are sort of these blasts from this media company that really is just sort of like the bullhorn of the government, of the police. And so I love that you did that. Like, the story we're getting is the actual human story. And but then we're seeing what you would have seen in the evening news that day, or that went across the police scanner or whatever. And then there's this like blogger guy, this Andrew Jackson, whatever, who's just kind of a guy posting terrible comments online, just totally gross. Oh, I don't know how you did that. But it also felt super true.
Yeah, and he's gained some like traction, some like popular traction.
Yeah,
right, as this internet personality, or
he has.
And so I thought that that's like something that I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in the near future. I know it already happens online, but like the crossover from that to a mainstream news organization.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if that happens.
Right. No, I mean, it feels like we're seeing it in many ways. Yeah, no, that was the scariest part. And then when I first started reading it, I had to take little breaks just because it was like, this is so real and true and sad. Like, and I personally just have to be careful about consuming news. And you know,
that's all, let me also say that's kind of why I thought placing them in the footnotes was a good place to have that stuff, because Cope's story is the engine of the book, and that's his story is unavoidable. People can kind of take or leave those footnotes, if they are something that is, we didn't want it to impede the story itself, or Cope's story, and so it is a part of the story that, while it's this undersong, right, you can just keep reading Cope's story if you want to.
Yeah, you really could, and it is the more important story, and the really beautiful. That's where you're going to find all the beautiful writing. But those are pretty quick, easy reads. So read it all, people. Read it all. Okay, so I know we're about out of time. Did you have any more questions, Jessica, or do I hit one more?
If you want to hit one more, I don't see anything from our viewers, but I might just speak slowly here for a second in case someone needs that auditory cue to slip in there.
You're so good, Jessica.
But yeah, I'm not seeing anything, so take it away.
We certainly don't have time to get into every character I'd hoped to talk about tonight. Like, I feel bad that we talked about Cope's dad and not his mom. We should always talk about the mom too. Is there anything you want to say there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Cope's mom is, just as she's differently influential upon him. She is a much more reserved character. And, I kind of played with the symbolism of the mask, in order to bring that out. But she also has this kind of, not just personality, but this resourcefulness and this, these survival strategies that are deeply a part of who she is as well. And so I wanted her, her personality to, be more subtly, suggested throughout the story, and especially the early part of the story. I think that readers can kind of, take what they, what they will from her, because she, again, because she is a character who continues to mask long after the virus is, apparently subdued. There is this kind of mystery around, some of her, some of her feelings. We know what she says, but what she feels about Cope's, troubled maturation is, is up for some interpretation. So.
And you could almost see that reflected just a little bit before, when she takes him to the barbershop, and the way she's navigating that environment, and what she wants for him as a man versus the men around him, and what he's seeing and absorbing and all of that. And so I felt like that was almost like a little mirror into her whole relationship with her son.
Oh, thank you. I
mean, say a lot, but you get it. So, okay, it looks like we have other questions, right?
One more question. It looks like we did get a question from Lydia, who asks, how do you stay motivated as a writer, especially when writing about current events that are full of pain?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I think that I write when I feel like writing. I do not write when I don't feel like writing. I think that for me, one of the best ways to kind of process 2020 and 2021, has been through writing. I don't, I think that there's so much in the world. There's so much that I've experienced. There's so much that I've seen. There's so much that I've read that, you know, I'm at no loss for like just things to write about. I'm at loss oftentimes for energy and time, you know, but not for like the real basis of inspiration, you know. I just think about all the people whose stories never get told, you know, and all the people who are already lost to time, and all even my own experiences that will be lost to time if I don't write about them. And so I think that so that whole like incredibly unexplored terrain, you know, does does inspire me, does motivate me to write. And these times that we're living in are pretty crazy. So yeah, it's just more and more stuff.
I won't remember the exact quote, but what you just said about people lost to time. There's a part in the book where it says something like, "What about all the people whose deaths weren't recorded?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
someone caught that one on camera, but what about all those that were not caught on camera? Right?
Yeah.
And, like, you're right. If you're not writing it, who's writing it?
Yeah.
Indeed. According to Wiki, McWhorter has made his opinions on racist or not, according to him, algorithms known. You referenced him earlier tonight. Did his statements on whether algorithms can be racist influence you at all?
Actually, no. Thank you for the question. I will look into that. No, I'm really only familiar with McWhorter's work on language and his political commentary. I'm not familiar with that branch of his commentary. My more specific sources are the medical anthropologist Ruha Benjamin and Dwayna Fulwiley, and their work around algorithm bias and around algorithm bias, and so that's more my where I'm coming from with that.
Excellent. Well, I think I might give us one final question to round us out. And this will either be very easy or very hard. What are you reading these days?
Oh man, so I have become really enthralled with the work of a Brazilian writer, Machado de Assis, particularly the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas. In fact, I just published a piece in LitHub about Black, I wanted to call it the 11 books of Black humor. And Black humor and also Black people writing funny books. And I start with Machado, which is kind of problematic because then, the editor went and I'm going to get in trouble now, but they retitled it, American books. I'm like, but it starts out with a Brazilian writer. Anyway, whatever. So Machado is like a really subtly funny writer. As a person of mixed race, in an American context, he would be considered Black. And his humor is very different from Black American humor, I should say. And so I find his take on, Rio de Janeiro, in the toward the end of slavery in that country, really interesting because it is a different kind of approach and mentality than I'm familiar with. And so that's one writer. A lot of other writers who I could also speak to.
Well, I hope everyone is already hitting those add to cart buttons for the Confessions of Copeland Cane, so that we all can read this. And as I mentioned before, you do want to do as Tina advised and buy one from all three stores, because this makes a great gift, and you can share it with your book club and all of the above, because there is so much to talk about. And I want to thank you both so much for joining us this evening. It was wonderful to have you, and do check out what's coming up next week. I've lost track of the calendar. It's the middle of summer. So follow us on Eventbrite and visit booksincommonnw.com for more.
Thank you, Jessica.